welcome to At Issue. I'm so pleased to be joined by a special guest, Mun Wah.
Good to be here.
Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to visit with us. Tell us first, you're here as a guest speaker at Eastern Illinois University. Tell us about why you've come to Central Illinois.
Wow, that's a really good question. I think almost every community asks me that same question. I think that because this country and almost every campus in the country is struggling with how to talk about diversity issues. Mm-hmm. Someone once asked me recently, did I think that our country was getting worse? And I said, no. I think our issues around diversity are becoming more public because we have a black president.
Okay.
I also think that there's a great myth or mythology that we have around our universities, is that somehow by putting our students together, that somehow everything's coming together. And I think the reason why I'm here is to give the bad news, is that no, people don't come together simply by putting them in the same room. I think you can have like the National Dialogue on Race, and what's surprising about it is not one single person talked to each other except to a panel. Mm-hmm. I strongly believe that the most segregated time in America is not on Sunday, but on every single campus at lunchtime. So that's why I'm here. How to be able to begin this conversation, or perhaps more importantly, is how to have this relationship with each other.
Well, you've worn many hats over the years. You started off as a school counselor, you're a poet and an author and a filmmaker. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I really couldn't hold down a job, no. No, actually, I started out to be a lawyer.
Okay.
And then first a writer, then a lawyer. And I only became a teacher because I was horrible at math. And also law cases were very boring to me, and too much preoccupation, I think, with power and not about people. And I was also then headed to also major in psychology. I did major in psychology partly because of the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy and also John F. Kennedy. And so I think the political environment had me change from law to psychology. And then when I was applying for graduate school in psychology, it was I was also told I'd have to take advanced statistics, which I barely got out of the basic statistics. And I hated filling out applications. And so I was in the library filling mine out, and this person across from me only had a one-page one, and I said, what was that for? And he said, education. And so I became a teacher for 25 years. What I discovered in that process was that I was really not only good with kids, but also I was really confronted with children of color, and also the disparity in the way that we treat children of color, particularly if they also have special needs. And so I really worked in the community and worked with my students on not only reframing how they saw themselves, but how to rebuild their own self-esteem in a society that I think, and still does, that every day tells them that being different is not always a great thing. Not being white is also something that I think that divides our country still to this day. Mm-hmm.
So your area is multiculturalism, and it can sometimes be a buzzword or cross-cultural communication. How do you define that?
Well, I don't believe that we are a multicultural nation.
Okay.
I think that is one of the greatest illusions, and a great, it brings a great deal of laughter to the rest of the world. I think that we have people from all over the world. That's true here. I think we are multiracial in the terms of that we have different people from different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. Multicultural means that you make good use of the culture, that you know something about the culture besides its foods, its music, and its clothing. I strongly believe that for us to become multicultural is that we'll have to integrate other cultures into our workplaces, our educational principles and theories and practices, as well into our corporate worlds. I think that we are more multi-holiday than we are multicultural. Mm-hmm. So it's still a goal. I think the dream of Martin Luther King, for instance, was that somehow we would find a way to integrate, make good use of who we are when we come into a room. For instance, yourself being a woman, to think about even in this field of the media, how much of being a woman has been integrated. Mm-hmm. And I think that what we are told, when people come in who are different into a room, into a workplace, was just said, okay, say hello to each other, okay, let's get to work. But none of what we bring in is valued or made use of. So that's still a goal, multiculturalism in our country.
Why do you think, we're not truly multicultural? Why do you think we're sort of stuck at being just multiracial?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with the founding fathers. First of all, they were all men.
Mm-hmm.
We should have been suspect when someone said all men are created equal. They didn't say women. They didn't say people
all
of color.
people.
Yes, so it really was all white men are created equal.
Uh-huh.
And you could probably see it. Even the very first people we met, who were the American Indians, we didn't bother to even learn their culture.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't even learn their language.
Right.
And so I think that the template was very monocultural. Every single diversity supplement to this country has been through an amendment to get women to vote, an amendment to allow people of color to vote. And even then it was taken by the Supreme Court back again. So I think that it's an afterthought. I think that it is scary for America today, being primarily white, to notice that within 20 years people of color will become the majority. I think we're really scared right now as to what that world will be like. I think the Congress is a very good example of how fearful we are to have a black president. That rather than to work together, rather than to learn from each other, is that really it's all about being afraid of a black family, a black president. We have made sure that we will not hear or learn from a black family. And if they do try and talk about what it's like to be black, it simply becomes reverse racism. Mm-hmm. So we're a long ways off. Like I've said to someone, simply having a black president means that you have to decide whether or not you're open to learning and embracing someone who's different to be the President of the United States.
So what you do now is you own a consulting firm and you train organizations and businesses on how to be more multicultural, how to communicate with one another. Tell us about some of the people you've worked with and how you kind of get that dialogue started when you're working with groups and organizations.
Yeah, actually, a very good example was today when I had the president of the college and all of his colleagues and everyone were there. And I had simply shared that President Barack Obama is simply the 6th black president of the United States, not the first one. And how sad that made me feel. Mm-hmm. And someone said, well, I got a question for you. And what I said was, which is very typically around the issues of diversity, is I simply said, don't you want to know how I feel when I told you that? And what I meant by that was that he didn't even notice that my tone of voice changed and that my voice was cracking. Mm-hmm. That I felt very sad having to tell my students that they could be anything they want, but not believing that. And that every single one of the presidents who were black could never have told the American people they were, or they wouldn't have been elected. And that's what I'm talking about, is that I think that what ends up in the American culture in corporations, government agencies, even institutions like this one right here, is that we want to interface with people who are different, but we want to do it in the way that we're used to. So I walk into the room, I'm the only person of color, the only Asian person. There are only 3 women out of maybe 15, 20 people. That what I'm wearing, my Tibetan shirt, is obviously inappropriate compared to all of their suits and ties. Mm-hmm. But not one single person notices my bracelets, my Buddhist bracelets, my Buddhist ring, my gi, which is what the Chinese people wear, which was cut off, or my Tibetan shirt. Everybody pretends they didn't see anything. But their look isn't necessarily a smile or one of curiosity. Tell me about your shirt. Tell me about your bracelet. But it's just pretending that they actually don't see anything. Mm-hmm. Or as one man said in the meeting today is, I look for a world where we become post-racial when we don't notice each other's differences. And I said, that's not post-racial to me. That's blindness. That's deafness. Mm-hmm. I want you to see my color. And one of the great mythologies in this country is that children don't see color when they walk into a room. Oh, yes, they do. The only difference is they run towards it. Later on, they learn to be afraid of it and to step back. Mm-hmm. So for me, when I work with corporations, is learning for them not just how to be adversarial, defensive, but to be curious. learning how to move their tables aside and sit next to me, learning how to talk with me without having to solve things, learning how to talk and connect and relate to each other through smiles, emotionally, and valuing emotional intelligence. Actually noticing that we're different and how to leverage and use that as a way of connecting. Not talking from our heads, but from our hearts. Noticing that when I leave a conversation, or that when you leave, that affects me, and saying something about it. Noticing that when I get angry or emotional or passionate, that's a good thing, that's a connective thing. Wanting to know my personal life and what it's taken for me to get to this room, how our lives might be different, and how you could be a part of that in helping change the world. To me, that is how we connect.
So I'm sure this is in your consulting area, you've spoken to a group of people and there's maybe some level of resistance, maybe not by the whole audience. How do you deal with people that say, I don't need that.
Well, that happened today.
That's not important.
So when I said, how many of you would like to know who the other 5 black presidents are? And he didn't raise his hand. Now, most places, nobody would have done what I did. Is I said, I noticed you didn't raise your hand. And he goes, well, no. And I said, do you want to know or you don't? He goes, no, I don't want to know. And then I simply did this. I leaned on the table and I said, tell me why you don't want to know. Because it affects me. Now, how many people would do that?
Not many.
Yeah, because you see, someone once said that we don't die from pain, but rather our resistance to it. So I'm not afraid of the no. I just like to find out why. And that too has a story. I also believe very strongly that I don't know and I don't care is a white privilege. You see, if I don't know the world around me, if I don't care about the world around me, my life is at stake in white America. If a woman doesn't know what it's like to walk into an all-male room, a black child, Asian, Latino, immigrant, doesn't know what they're going to face, what's going to happen to them, their life is at stake. And as parents, we will have to tell our children, as my father had to tell me, so that I'd come home alive. And that is a world that a white family may never have to tell their child. And so I simply live from the day I was born how to survive.
Well, I was going to ask you, what was it like for you growing up? Were you the only Asian American in a classroom full of white children?
Well, actually, I was in a classroom of poor children.
Okay.
So I grew up in a very poor part of Oakland, California, on the flatlands of California. And yes, we were just pretty much the only Asian family pretty much in the whole school. And so I accommodated to a world. They did not assimilate my values, but rather my name was made fun of, my accent was being made fun of, the foods that I brought to school was made fun of, and so I changed. I gave up my foods. I gave up my accent.
Fit in with the rest of the...
Of course, to white America, not just to the rest of the kids. And when my name was read out, the teacher laughed. And so all of that was all part of that process of realizing that being different was not valued, it was not rewarded, no one was curious about it. In fact, even when I remember it in the 6th grade, when the teacher wanted to do a racial survey and said Chinese, I didn't raise my hand. That is how acculturated I became. I remember my African-American girlfriend, when I was in my 20s, said to me, you know, it's Valentine's, Mun Wah. I want you to go out and buy us a Valentine's card with your picture and my card and my picture on it, and don't come back unless you get it. And believe it or not, I actually believed I could find that card. And I remember standing in front of all these Hallmark cards and crying. That I had become so acculturated that I didn't even notice I was missing. And when I confronted and asked Hallmark how come they didn't have more cards like that, they said who would buy them. And so I strongly believe that we're missing. And most people don't even know we're not there. And I believe that in the year 2013, we are still missing. Most people don't know that when Senator Barack Obama was a senator, he was the only black person in the entire United States Senate, and what that must have been like for him. Or maybe what Michelle Obama said when her husband got elected, when I was at Princeton, I felt like I was an outsider. And not one single reporter asked her what happened. So it's that lack of curiosity, that lack of questioning. And what they simply said was that was reverse racism to bring it up. So there are ways within our society to keep us from finding out. So if we don't begin to work in our institutions like schools to have the students become curious, they will simply only believe in being adversarial, changing the subject, or being defensive.
And you take that onto the places you work?
Yeah, I have a whole list of questions that I teach students that they could ask, so that open up the conversation. I teach them what empathy looks like, compassion looks like. I also was working with some people on, someone said, this one white man came up to me and says, well, I just tell people, you know, I'd like to be forgiven. And I said, no, I don't forgive anybody when they say that. I will forgive you and I will accept your apology when I feel you understand what you did and that you'll change.
So you mentioned this list of questions. Let's just run through a few
I'll give
of them.
you one.
So if I, run into somebody or have an acquaintance with someone from a different culture than me, and I haven't really asked a lot of questions, I'll give you a really confrontive one.
That if I were to say you, God, I'm just pissed that there aren't enough black teachers here. And I'm black, okay? Or I'll just change it. I'm just really pissed on this campus because where are the Asian teachers? Okay. So you might start off with, Mun Wah, tell me, what happened? What has it been like to not see any Asian teachers? How does it hurt you? How does it anger you? What's familiar about it outside of the classroom too, and in this community? Then along with that, you might want to ask me is, if I did have some Chinese teachers or Asian teachers here, how would that change your life? What would feel good about it to you? If you were facing an all-white audience, what would you love to tell them about you as a Chinese man? What you love about your people and who you are? All of what I just said, I have never heard in all my 67 years of my life.
No one's ever asked you that?
None of those
questions.
or said those back to me.
And why do you think people don't ask that?
Because we don't know.
We don't know to ask, or we don't want the...
We have never had anyone model it for us. You see, what we think diversity is all about is celebrations, foods, and dances. And maybe we learn one person of color from that culture. But the truth of it really is that what we've missed about diversity is this. We don't even know how to even begin the conversation, let alone walk up to a person of color. The way it's done mostly is this. Hi, what are you? Hi, who are you? Most people begin that way when they see someone different. They forget this. Hi, hello. By the way, I'd like to get to know you. Rarely do I see a white person go, by the way, I'm German American. What are you? Instead of just, I'm an American.
Yeah.
And then when they ask me, what am I go, Chinese. No, what are you? Where were you born? Oakland, California. No, where were you really born? Okay? Or maybe it might be this, just like what Joe Biden did to Barack Obama. My God, Mun Wah, you're so articulate. And what that means is, oh my gosh, I guess the rest of the Asians you met weren't that articulate. Or maybe two things that white people never get to hear. You know, Mun Wah, after getting to know you, God, you're such a credit to your people. And one more thing I've been touched with, Mun Wah, is you speak such good English. Where'd you learn it from? Two questions a white person will never be asked in this country. And so it makes me feel different. It makes me feel like an alien. And so all of that conversation, I think that whites don't know how to do it because they look to another white person to model it for them. And also for people of color, we have never experienced or known what it's like to have someone really, truly want to know about us. Because we never got it to how white people treated the American Indians, and we've never seen a model of how they treat people of color. And I think the only time we take the time to know people of color is if they attack us, or at times of war, or we're forced to have someone in our family who marries someone who's different before we actually learn about that culture. And even then, look at all the presidential debates, almost no questions on the issues of diversity. Not one single candidate other than John F. Kennedy ever talked about their ethnic background. Only a person of color. And that's only the one that we've gotten.
Well, let's move on a little bit. It's given us a lot to think about. In addition to, being a speaker and an author and a consultant, you're also a filmmaker. And when I told people you were coming on the show, a lot of people know you for the film that you made called The Color of Fear. How did you get into filmmaking? What sort of drove that for you?
Well, most people know that wasn't my first film, even though I did one on stolen ground racism towards Asian Americans. The Color of Fear was done in 1995, and I only asked one question, and there was no script. It was simply, what's your name and ethnicity? And they exploded on screen for almost 3 hours on the anguish just on that question alone. And over, I guess, 30 million people from all over the world have seen that film. Almost close to 600,000 people have taken my workshops. And it was on Oprah Winfrey in 1995. I think that's exactly what the title says. I think we have a fear of color. And I think that we still do. And I think we have a fear of people who are different. And I think in my newest film, which is on If These Halls Could Talk, 11 college students from all over the country gathered together for almost 8 days. I think is my most confrontive, most intimate film. I think it will rock this country. It will shake them up into what's really going on. But along with that is, leave it to the young people. They can say in one sentence that takes adults, more older adults, at least 10 sentences to say.
So were these 11 college students of all different
ethnicities?
From one college or from different?
All over the country, all different colleges, junior colleges included. Immigrants who come to this country, and it's so beautiful. And I think that and I'm hoping that we'll do a premiere here in this community. And the whole idea of all of my films isn't to discuss the film, as it is to get the community to talk to each other. And I even talked to the president where they have had racial incidences on the Facebook in this, and even then they weren't sure what to do. And what I said is, it should be required that every single classroom talk about this. In fact, he was laughing when I said that probably the most segregated time is at lunchtime. He goes, absolutely, on this campus. And what I said, what would it be like if I were to tell you that I could actually get everybody on this campus to eat with somebody different who they don't know? If I told you you could do that, would you do it? He goes, yes. And I said, all you have to do is have every single faculty member require as a homework assignment and for credit and for a grade that they have to pair up with somebody who they don't know and who's different, and to sit next with them in class for the next month and get to know them and give them a set of questions. That they had to be required to be able to sit at a table and invite somebody who was different and they didn't know, invite them over to have lunch and get to know them and write a paper about them. That overnight this entire campus could be meeting someone who's different, not just staring at them, and see what it's like to meet somebody, get to know them. That's why I want to teach this next generation and this faculty is, at any given day with any given person, you can change the world. You can meet the world. It's not just talking about it, celebrating it, but actually doing it.
So what's next for you on your speaking?
Well, there's also one thing I didn't share.
Okay.
Is how I came to do this work in The Color of Fear was because an African American man broke into my mom's home and shot her 5 times in the head.
Oh, why?
And that is how I left teaching and went into therapy because I was so traumatized. And then how I had to look at my own racism and then also work with men who were violent and eventually become a therapist doing groups, multi-ethnic groups and violent groups, for people to look at these issues. So that's how I came to do this work. And so it's been a long journey. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I strongly believe that perhaps it's at these moments that we come to the precipice that we have to look at ourselves. Yeah.
So what, as we wrap up here, what is one thing that we could all do to become less multiracial and more multicultural, do you think? What small change that maybe we could all make?
Well, I think what it would be is exactly what I said, is take the time to meet somebody that you don't know, but not just get to know them in a general way, but ask them questions like, what's it like to be here in this town and being one of few people of color? What's it like to be gay in a room of heterosexuals? What do you leave at the door? As I even said when the young man took me here today to hear, what's it like to be black? Or even noticing that he kept saying sir instead of Mun Wah. And what's that all about when you live in South Carolina, and how that's hard to break. Or even asking, why are you wearing a suit on a warm day like this? What would it mean if you didn't wear a suit, and how people would see you, and being curious and believing them. Or maybe even as you and I are sitting here across, it would be when we finish the conversation to share what touched you, what moved you, rather than simply the next question. That's a way of beginning, that's a way of connecting, changing the world one person at a time. I think that it was beautiful what Mother Teresa said, is that perhaps we have no peace in this world is because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. We truly do. We really do need each other more than we know.
Yeah. Mun Wah, it was such a pleasure to meet you and have you on our program.
You're welcome.
Welcome to Central Illinois, and we hope you enjoy your time here.
And as we say in Cantonese, "Doa jia," which is thank you in Cantonese.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.